With all due respect, Mr. Conti, but your client seems autistic. The word hung in the rarefied air of courtroom 3B, heavy and sharp as a shard of glass. Judge Pierre Volkov delivered it with a casual disdain that made it all the more cutting. He adjusted his glasses on the tip of his nose, a gesture of impatience that barely concealed the contempt in his gaze, directed not at the defense attorney, but straight at the 17-year-old sitting on the uncomfortable wooden chair. Isn't he even paying attention to the proceedings? We're wasting precious time here. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the low, constant hum of the fluorescent lights overhead, a sound that, to Lucas Stefan, felt like a swarm of angry insects trapped inside his head. He wasn't inattentive, quite the opposite. He was paying attention to everything, to the way the light refracted in the judge's glass of water, creating a small, trembling rainbow on the dark wood of the bench, to the worn pattern of the carpet near the prosecutor's table, where countless nervous feet had shuffled back and forth, and above all, to the micro-expression of triumph that flickered for a split second across the face of the prosecuting attorney, Sebastian Kaya Moreau, when the judge uttered that word, autistic, not as a diagnosis, but as a sentence, a disqualification, a veiled insult disguised as procedural concern. Lucas was only 17 and had never imagined that the system designed to protect the innocent would be the weapon used to condemn him before the evidence was even presented. The accusation was absurd: vandalism of commercial property, a can of spray paint found near his backpack, an anonymous witness who conveniently placed him at the scene. It was a trap so poorly constructed it should have crumbled under the slightest scrutiny, yet here he was, being judged not by facts, but by the way he existed in the world. His own lawyer, Matteo Conti, an overworked public defender, visibly intimidated by Judge Volkov's reputation, stammered a weak response. "Your Honor, my client is processing. He has a different way of interacting." Conti's hesitation was another nail in the coffin of his defense. Lucas felt a flush rise up his neck, but his expression remained neutral, a mask of calm that many mistook for apathy. It was a survival technique he'd learned early on. Showing emotion was providing ammunition, and in this courtroom, he was surrounded by enemies. He already knew something was wrong long before he set foot inside. A quick, photograph-sharp flashback invaded his mind. 3 days ago, in the courthouse hallway, waiting for his lawyer, he saw Sebastian Moreau speaking in low tones with the property manager of the vandalized business, the same man who would later become the main witness. It wasn't the conversation that caught his attention, but the envelope Moreau discreetly slipped into the manager's pocket. A quick gesture, almost imperceptible to a casual observer. But Lucas wasn't a casual observer. His brain registered details others dismissed as background noise. He had told Matteo Conti about what he'd seen. "It's circumstantial, Lucas. We can't use it. It'll look like we're desperate, making up conspiracies," was his lawyer's disheartening reply. Desperation. That's how his heightened perception was viewed. A flaw, not a tool. Now in court, all the pieces fit together with painful clarity. The flimsy accusation, the smug prosecutor, the impatient, prejudiced judge. This wasn't a trial. It was theater, and he had been cast as the villain so someone else could walk away scot-free. Judge Volkov rapped his pen on the desk. "Processing. Mr. Conti, either your client demonstrates the respect due to this court and answers questions coherently, or I will be forced to interpret his silence as a sign of guilt and disdain." The threat was clear. Moreau smiled, a thin, predatory grin. He leaned into the microphone. "Your Honor, perhaps the defendant needs an incentive. We would like to call our witness, Mr. Diego Torres, who saw young Stefan at the scene with the spray can in his hand." Diego Torres, the manager who had received the envelope, took the witness stand with the demeanor of a concerned citizen. A rehearsed performance Lucas could see through every calculated gesture. He lied with astonishing ease, painting a picture of a delinquent, antisocial teenager. Lucas remained silent, not out of defiance, but strategy. He watched, cataloged, analyzed, the way Torres's eyes avoided his, the nervous twitch in Moreau's neck whenever his name was mentioned, the way Judge Volkov leaned forward, absorbing every word that confirmed his prejudices. It was an ecosystem of corruption, and everyone played their part to perfection. After the false testimony, the judge turned to Lucas. "Mr. Stefan, do you have anything to say in your defense? Any explanation for your erratic and destructive behavior?" The question was a trap. Anything he said would be twisted, used against him. His calm would be interpreted as coldness, his detailed explanation as confabulation. So he did the only thing he could. He broke the silence, but not in the way they expected. His voice came out steady, unwavering, echoing in the tense silence. "Your Honor, I have the right to a phone call." Judge Volkov frowned, taken aback. "A phone call? This isn't a police procedural, son. You're in a hearing." Moreau let out a muffled laugh. "Perhaps he wants to call his mother, Your Honor." The mockery was palpable, but Lucas didn't flinch. He maintained eye contact with the judge, an intensity in his gaze that made Volkov hesitate for a moment. There was something there he couldn't decipher. It wasn't fear. It wasn't arrogance. It was certainty, a serenity that only exists in those who have weathered far worse storms and survived to tell the tale. "It's my right," Lucas repeated, his voice low but carrying an unexpected weight. The judge, annoyed by the audacity but bound by the letter of the law, sighed dramatically. "Very well. Officer will escort you. 5 minutes. And let this be a lesson about wasting the court's time." As Officer Zola Dubois escorted him out, Lucas felt all eyes on him. Eyes of pity, of contempt, of amusement. They saw a strange, cornered kid, a lost cause. There, before all those contemptuous gazes, he stood firm, like someone guarding a secret too powerful to reveal before its time. They thought this was the end, a minor formality before they crushed him. Little did they know that phone call wasn't a plea for help. It was the beginning of the countdown to the complete demolition of their worlds. If this story of prejudice and resilience touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to discover how a simple moment of humiliation would become the catalyst for a revolution no one in that courtroom would ever forget. The room Officer Zola Dubois took him to was small, windowless, and smelled of disinfectant and despair. A gray metal phone was bolted to the wall. 5 minutes. The time Judge Volkov had granted him, more as a punishment than a right. The officer waited outside, but Lucas knew she was likely listening. Let her listen. He dialed the number from memory, one he knew as well as his own name. The phone rang just once on the other side of the country, in an office where decisions affecting nations were made daily. A calm, professional voice answered. "Office of the Attorney General. How may I help you?" Lucas didn't address the assistant. He used a single word, a code he hadn't used in years, not since he was a small boy afraid of thunder. "Storm." There was a pause of less than a second on the other end of the line, and then the professional voice was replaced by another, a voice that held an innate authority. But to Lucas, it was simply the sound of safety. "Lucas? Son, what happened? Where are you?" The voice belonged to Alexander Ivanov. To the world, he was the Attorney General of the United States, the country's chief law enforcement officer. To Lucas, he was just Dad. "I'm at the courthouse, Dad. County Courthouse, room 3B. Lucas's voice remained steady, reporting facts, not emotions. "I've been accused of vandalism. It's a setup, but that's not why I'm calling." Alexander was already in motion. Lucas could hear the muffled sound of papers being shuffled, of orders being whispered to an assistant. "Go on, son. I'm listening." The judge. "His name is Pierre Volkov. He called me autistic, in front of everyone like an insult. He said I wasn't paying attention." Lucas paused, the weight of that single word finally manifesting in his chest. "He used it to discredit me. The prosecutor, Sebastian Moreau, is involved. I saw him bribing the witness." The silence on the line was heavy, dense. It wasn't a silence of inaction, but the silence of a colossal force being gathered. When Alexander spoke again, his voice had lost all paternal warmth and become pure steel. "Pierre Volkov, Sebastian Kaya Moreau, County Courthouse, room 3B. Understood. Stay calm, Lucas. Don't say another word in that courtroom. Just observe. Help is on the way." The call ended. Lucas hung up the phone. He had used only 2 of his 5 minutes. When Officer Dubois opened the door, he faced her with the same neutral expression as before. Back in the courtroom, the atmosphere was even more hostile. Moreau was laughing with the prosecutor, while Judge Volkov perused some papers with an expression of supreme boredom. When Lucas sat down, the judge looked up. "I hope you said your goodbyes, Mr. Stefan. Now let's get this over with. Based on the testimony presented and your clear lack of remorse or cooperation, I find you guilty of the charge of vandalism." Moreau smiled openly. Matteo Conti, Lucas's lawyer, lowered his head, defeated. Injustice was a poison that paralyzed everyone. Volkov continued, savoring his power. "Your sentence will be 200 hours of community service and a fine of $5,000. Furthermore, a note will be attached to your permanent record detailing your defiant conduct in this court. Perhaps this will teach you a lesson about respect." With each word, the judge tried to break Lucas, expecting to see a tear, a protest, any sign that he had won. He got none. Lucas simply watched him, his eyes calm and focused. This serenity seemed to infuriate the judge even more. "Look at me when I'm talking to you, boy. That attitude of yours is precisely the problem." Volkov's cruelty was no longer veiled. It was an explicit display of power, an abuse of his position to humiliate a teenager he considered inferior. He saw Lucas's neurodivergence not as a difference but as a defect to be punished. What the judge and everyone in that room didn't know was that Lucas's resilience had been forged in a far hotter fire. He remembered when he was 8 years old, at a new school. A group of boys cornered him on the playground because he preferred reading about insect taxonomy to playing soccer. They pushed him, mocked his strangeness. He didn't cry. He simply memorized each one's face, the shoes they wore, the exact words they said. Later, his father found him sitting alone, drawing the insects from his book. "They don't understand how your mind works, Lucas," Alexander said, sitting down beside him. "They're afraid of what they don't understand. But never forget, your mind sees patterns they don't. You see the truth behind the noise. That's not a weakness, it's your greatest strength." That memory gave Lucas the strength to endure the humiliation of the moment. Each new offense from Judge Volkov, each sarcastic smirk from Moreau, only strengthened something within him that his oppressors couldn't see. A silent force fueled by the very injustice they tried to impose. He was not a passive victim waiting for rescue. He was the bait, and the trap was about to spring shut. What these privileged people didn't know was that every act of contempt was writing its own sentence of defeat. For a moment, when Lucas lowered his head upon hearing the sentence, everyone thought they had broken his spirit. The judge smiled with satisfaction. Moreau put away his papers, ready to celebrate the easy victory. But those who know true strength know that it grows precisely in silence. Lucas's head was not bowed in defeat, but in concentration, like a predator waiting for the exact moment to strike, and the moment was coming. Officer Dubois approached Lucas to escort him to the room where sentencing procedures would be finalized. Matteo Conti, his lawyer, placed a hesitant hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry, Lucas. I should have done more." His voice was a whisper of failure. Lucas merely nodded, his eyes fixed on the main door of the courtroom. He wasn't listening to Conti's apologies or Moreau's murmurs of satisfaction. He was waiting. He was counting. Time seemed to drag, each second stretching into an elastic eternity. Judge Volkov had already picked up his gavel to move on to the next case, a smirk of contempt still lingering on his lips. He was about to bring down the gavel and seal Lucas's fate when a sound broke the courtroom's monotony. The double doors at the back of the room swung open, not with a gentle creak, but with a decisive force that made everyone turn. It wasn't a weeping relative or a tardy lawyer. It was two figures, a man and a woman, dressed in dark, formal attire that screamed federal authority. The woman, Ingrid Benami, had a stern face and eyes that seemed capable of seeing through walls and lies. The man beside her, well, the man was Alexander Ivanov. He didn't stride in as a furious father. There were no shouts or accusations. He entered with the calm of an approaching hurricane. His presence sucked the air out of the room. The lawyers stopped mid-sentence. The court clerk, who had been typing frantically, froze with her fingers, hovering over the keyboard. Judge Volkov slowly lowered his gavel, the smirk vanishing from his face, replaced by a mask of confusion and irritation. "May I help you? We are in the middle of a session," he said, trying to reassert his authority, but his voice sounded a pitch higher than usual. Alexander Ivanov didn't answer immediately. He walked down the central aisle, his expensive shoes making a rhythmic, deliberate sound on the linoleum floor. His eyes met Lucas's for a fleeting moment, and, in that silent gaze, a lifetime of trust and support was communicated. Then his focus shifted to the bench. "Judge Pierre Volkov," Alexander said, his voice not loud, but projected to fill every corner of the room. "My name is Alexander Ivanov." He paused, letting the name sink in. Some in the room, the more informed ones, swallowed hard. Moreau, the prosecuting attorney, visibly paled. "And I am here on behalf of the United States Department of Justice." The silence in the room was now so profound that one could hear the sound of dust falling. The confusion on Volkov's face gave way to barely concealed panic. "The Department of Justice? What does that have to do with a county court vandalism case?" Alexander reached the front of the room, stopping beside the defense table. He placed a leather briefcase on the table with a soft thud that echoed like a gunshot. "We are not here for the vandalism, Your Honor. We are here for a potential violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act and for multiple complaints of judicial misconduct." He opened the briefcase. "We are in possession of the official transcript of this hearing. I would like to draw your attention to page 4, line 17, where you refer to the defendant, a minor, as autistic, not as a diagnostic fact but as a pejorative term to question his competence and attention." The color drained completely from Judge Volkov's face. Sebastian Moreau looked as if he were about to faint. He looked from Volkov to Alexander Ivanov, his arrogant mind finally connecting the dots. The autistic kid and the U.S. Attorney General with the same last name. It was a nightmare becoming reality. That was taken out of context," Volkov stammered, his voice losing all authority. "I was merely expressing concern about the defendant's behavior." "Concern?" Alexander retorted, his voice now carrying a thread of ice. "We also have the audio recording from the room, which makes your tone of contempt clear. And that, Your Honor, was merely what brought us here. In a preliminary investigation conducted over the last hour, we have uncovered a disturbing pattern in your judgments." Ingrid Benami, the federal agent, stepped forward, holding a tablet. "Judge Volkov, in the last 5 years, you have presided over 47 cases involving defendants with documented disabilities, from ADHD to autism spectrum disorder. In 45 of those cases, you have issued the maximum verdict permitted by law, often citing lack of cooperation or defiant attitude in your sentences. A conviction rate of 95%, nearly 40 percentage points higher than the average for similar cases in this jurisdiction." Every word was a nail in Volkov's career coffin. Moreau, desperately trying to save himself, attempted to intervene. "This is an outrage. My client and I are victims of an abuse of power. The Attorney General is using his position to intimidate the court because of his son." Alexander slowly turned to face Moreau. His eyes were as cold as the Arctic. "Mr. Sebastian Kaya Moreau, I'm glad you spoke up, because we are also investigating allegations of witness tampering. We have security footage from the hallway of this courthouse, dated 3 days ago, showing you handing an envelope to Mr. Diego Torres, the sole prosecution witness in this case. A quick check of your finances shows a cash withdrawal of $5,000 that same morning, the same amount as the fine Judge Volkov just imposed on my son. A remarkable coincidence, wouldn't you say?" It was at this moment that everyone laughed, but not at Lucas. The nervous, incredulous laughter came from the small gallery, from the other lawyers and staff witnessing the unraveling of a tyrant. Something unexpected was happening, not just in the environment, but most importantly in Judge Volkov's eyes. Panic had turned to pure terror. He realized it wasn't just his career that was at stake. It was his freedom. He looked at Lucas, the quiet boy he had humiliated, and for the first time he saw not a disabled person, but the architect of his destruction. Under the weight of all those now accusatory gazes, Volkov's hands trembled visibly as he held the gavel that no longer held power. Anyone watching closely would notice that it wasn't anger making those hands shake. It was the paralyzing fear of someone about to lose absolutely everything at the hands of the person he had most underestimated. The dismantling was methodical, brutal, and executed with the precision of a surgeon. Alexander Ivanov didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Every document he presented, every piece of evidence he cited, was a more powerful hammer blow than any Judge Volkov had ever wielded. Volkov's arrogance unraveled layer by layer until all that remained was a small, terrified man drowning in the consequences of his own prejudice. The Department of Justice is opening a full federal investigation into the conduct of this court, Alexander announced, his voice resonating with the authority of the entire nation. Agent Ben-Ami, please secure all records, computers, and documents from Judge Volkov's chambers. He will be suspended from judicial duties, effective immediately, while the investigation is underway. 2 federal agents who had entered silently and positioned themselves near the bench moved. One of them approached Volkov. Judge Volkov, please accompany us. The title judge was spoken with a chilling formality that stripped him of all power. Volkov looked around, desperate, searching for an ally, a flicker of hope. He found none. His colleagues in the courtroom averted their gaze. Sebastian Moreau was already being discreetly questioned by another agent in a corner of the room, his face a mask of panic as he tried and failed to invent a plausible excuse for the financial transaction. Volkov's humiliation was complete. He had to remove his judicial robe right there, in front of everyone, folding the black fabric that symbolized his authority and handing it to the court officer. Without the robe, he looked smaller, older, an ordinary man stripped of his borrowed power. As he was escorted out of his own courtroom, his eyes met Lucas's one last time. Lucas's expression was not one of triumph or revenge. It was one of almost clinical calm, the expression of someone who had simply presented the facts and watched the logical conclusion unfold. This lack of gloating was, perhaps, the final blow to Volkov. He had not been defeated by anger or passion, but by a cold, implacable logic he was incapable of comprehending. With Volkov and Moreau neutralized, Alexander Ivanov turned to the prosecutor, Julia Francois Castillo, who had watched everything with a mixture of shock and professionalism. Ms. Castillo, given the circumstances, does the state wish to proceed with this absurd case against my son? Julia, realizing she was on the wrong side of history, stood up quickly. No, Mr. Attorney General. In light of these shocking revelations, the state withdraws all charges against Lucas Stefan. We apologize to the court and to the defendant. Alexander then addressed the substitute judge, who had been hastily summoned and was watching everything with wide eyes. Your Honor, I request that the charges be not only dismissed but expunged from Lucas Stefan's record. This young man should not carry any mark of this judicial farce. The substitute judge granted the request. Instantly. Granted. The record is cleared. Justice, which had previously seemed like an insurmountable mountain, was delivered in a matter of minutes. Power had not been fought with more power. It had been dismantled by truth. The execution of the turnaround was so complete it left everyone in the room breathless. The evidence gathered by Lucas, the observation of the bribe, the trigger for the phone call, combined with his father's resources, created a perfect storm that swept away corruption. In one fell swoop. Lucas did not utter a word throughout the entire process. He didn't need to. His calm and observation had been the most potent weapon of all. He acted with a dignity that highlighted the baseness of his accusers, proving he wasn't seeking cruelty, but rather the rebalancing of the scales. As the courtroom began to fill with whispers and reporters, who had sensed a major story, began to gather outside, Alexander put an arm around Lucas's shoulders. Let's go home, son. As they exited, they passed Sebastian Moreau, who was being handcuffed. The arrogant lawyer who, less than an hour before, had mocked Lucas, now looked at him with pure terror, finally understanding the magnitude of his mistake. He hadn't just underestimated a kid. He had underestimated a mind that operated on a level he could never reach. The visual image was powerful. At the center of that hall where discrimination disguised as tradition once reigned, a new reality was now taking shape. The deposed judge, the corrupt lawyer arrested, and the autistic young man walking out with his head held high, not as a victim, but as the catalyst for justice. It was like a symphony, finally finding its harmony after years of dissonant notes, proving that true excellence knows no prejudice, social class, or limitations imposed by those who fear true greatness. The immediate battle was won, but as the masks fell and the dust settled, a larger question remained in the air. Would it be possible to build bridges over such deep abysses of prejudice and ignorance? Or was the fall of one judge just a drop in the ocean of a flawed system? In the months that followed, Lucas Stefan's life changed in ways he could never have predicted. The story of the autistic teen who took down a corrupt judge with one phone call became a national media sensation. Initially, he felt uncomfortable with the attention. Cameras and reporters were a sensory overload he preferred to avoid. But then, the letters and emails began to arrive, hundreds of them, from parents of children with autism thanking him for showing the world that their children were more than a diagnosis, from adults on the spectrum who felt seen and validated for the first time, from people who had been victims of the judicial system and now felt a glimmer of hope. Lucas realized his story was no longer just about him. It had become a symbol. With his father's help, he learned to navigate this new territory. He didn't give flashy interviews or appear on talk shows. Instead, he started writing. He wrote about how his mind worked, not as a set of deficits, but as a different operating system. He described how the ability to focus intensely on patterns and details, often seen as an obsession, was actually a powerful tool for finding truth amidst chaos. His writings, published on online platforms, went viral for their clarity, honesty, and profound insight. He became an unexpected and influential voice in advocating for the rights of neurodivergent individuals. He thrived, not in spite of who he was, but because of who he was. Far from the spotlight, the fate of his tormentors unfolded with poetic and inevitable justice. Pierre Volkov was formally removed from office, lost his law license, and faced federal charges for civil rights violations. His reputation, built over decades, was reduced to dust. He became a pariah in the legal community, a cautionary tale of what not to be. He was sentenced to 2 years in Maoidu federal prison, an ironic sentence for a man who had sent so many others to prison based on his own prejudices. He lost his pension, his home, and his family's respect. His downfall was not just professional, it was total. Sebastian Kaya Moreau, the arrogant lawyer, met a similar fate. Confronted with irrefutable evidence of bribery and obstruction of justice, he cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence, but his career was over. He was disbarred, and his law firm, built on unethical tactics, collapsed. He went from a respected attorney to a low-level legal consultant, forever marked by the scandal. Matteo Conti, the public defender who initially failed Lucas, sought him out months later. He apologized, not with flimsy excuses, but with genuine humility. "I underestimated you, Lucas. I looked at you and saw what the system wanted me to see. A difficult case. I didn't see the person. You taught me more about justice in one day than my 10 years of practice. Because of you, I've changed the way I approach each of my clients." The acknowledgement from his former lawyer was, for Lucas, a victory as significant as Volkov's fall. True change wasn't about punishing the wicked, but about transforming the good to be better. The final validation came from his father. On a quiet evening, months later, Alexander Ivanov sat with Lucas on their porch, watching the stars. "You know, son," Alexander said, "for years, my work was about fighting for justice on a large scale in conference rooms and high courts. But what you did that day, you reminded me that the most important justice is that which defends the dignity of a single person. You didn't wait for someone to fight for you. You used your mind, your courage, and forced the system to correct itself. I'm prouder of you than any case I've ever won." The moral of Lucas's story was clear and powerful. The best revenge wasn't retaliation, but overcoming. It was turning an attempt at humiliation into a platform for change. It was using intelligence and integrity to build a future so bright that the shadows of the past couldn't reach it. Lucas graduated high school as valedictorian and was accepted into one of the country's top universities to study computer science and law, planning to use his unique ability to see patterns to revolutionize forensic data analysis. He proved that the traits that made him different were, in fact, his greatest assets. Judge Volkov had tried to destroy Lucas, but ended up destroying himself. Lucas learned that true revenge is not to return the harm suffered. It is to achieve the success that his enemies could never imagine. And you? What would you do if you were in Lucas's shoes? Let us know in the comments if you've ever felt your greatest strength was seen as a weakness. If this story of justice and resilience inspired you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more narratives that prove sometimes the universe needs a little nudge to put everything in its rightful place.